This is part 2 of chapter 8 of The Art of Public Speaking. And this is on supporting your ideas. Part 1, we covered examples and statistics. In this last part, we're going to talk about testimony. We're also going to talk about citing your sources during your speech. So this is the second part of chapter 8. The next section the book talks about in terms of potential support for your speech is testimony. Now, there are 3 different kinds of testimony that can be used, not for your speech necessarily, but in general, there are 3 different kinds of testimony that are used. One is expert testimony. If you have a source, a research, and it says, well, according to Dr. Charles Davis, the leading neurosurgeon at Boston Medical University, if you drink 5 cups a day of water, your brain will be healthier. I don't know that that's true. I just made it up. But that's expert testimony. Then, of course, on television, the 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed recommend this particular or toothpaste with fluoride in it, whatever it might be. Then there's 2 other kinds of testimony. Now, expert testimony can be used to prove something to be true. These other 2 types tend to lend credibility to the idea, but don't necessarily prove it. One is peer testimony. Well, my good friend Fred, he said this. Okay, if we know him, that lends credibility to it, but it doesn't inherently prove that it's true. The other kind of testimony is prestige testimony. Now, as you may know, I think Michael Jordan endorses Hanes underwear. Well, that's fine. Michael Jordan does not have a doctorate in underwearology, so he's not expert testimony. However, there's prestige testimony. Other times you see celebrities endorsing a product. Those are examples of prestige testimony. It talks about the difference between quoting versus paraphrasing. It's always best to quote. Sometimes a quote maybe is not said well and it can be paraphrased, but it's generally best to quote. Tips for using testimony. You want to quote or paraphrase accurately. You don't ever want to say this was someone's quote and then you give it, right? And let's just say your video with the new online class, your video goes up on YouTube and someone that you quoted looks at your speech and says, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I said. That's problematic. You have to quote accurately and you have to really, really be careful, especially in paraphrasing, to paraphrase accurately. You want to use testimony from qualified sources, and it's good to use sources. It's good to use sources that are qualified, and especially in terms of proving something's true in a speech of persuasion. And so expert testimony can be very, very important. But again, you have to make sure that expert testimony is valid. There was a website that a cable news channel had cited, basically trying to prove that global warming, wasn't really happening. I had a student who took that website and he actually tracked down the academic careers of everybody who wrote on the website. It's really interesting because here's a website that purported itself to be an authority on global warming. And everybody that worked on the website, not one person who wrote on that website had a degree of any kind in any science-related field, let alone global warming. So if you're going to use testimony, which is what Fox News was doing, and when I told you who it was, that's fine. Fox News was using them to prove that global warming wasn't real. The problem with that is you have to make sure that testimony is valid. You have to make sure they really are experts. So you have to do that. Use testimony from an unbiased source. I had a student one time who was speaking in favor of the right to bear arms, and that's fine. I believe in the Second Amendment. And his support was 3 articles, or 3 pamphlets, that is, that he got. And all the pamphlets that he got were from the National Rifle Association. That's problematic. That's too many from one source that has a clear agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but you do have to have some from other sources as well. Always identify the people you're going to quote or paraphrase. Tell us why they're an expert on the topic if that is an issue. I talked about citing sources orally in your speech. It's very, very important that you cite sources orally during your speech. The first time you would want to give that full contextualization, the full thing about their source and why they're an expert. The Dr. Charles Davis, the leading neurosurgeon at Boston Medical University, you would say that the first time. The second time you come back to it, then you would say, well, Dr. Davis also says this. And that way you're not having to cite that whole thing every single time. That is part 2, and that's the end of chapter 8. And I will get this posted as well, of The Art of Public Speaking.